everyone. Welcome. We're so glad you could make it today. My name is Gladys Rama. I'm the Editorial Director of Virtualization and Cloud Review, and I'm so pleased to be moderating the first session of our Cloud Security Automation Summit, which is brought to you today by Rubrik and CoreView. The editorial staff of Virtualization and Cloud Review have worked really hard to bring together some of the best independent experts on this topic, so we really hope that you enjoy it. Before we get started, though, with these 3 great sessions, a couple of announcements, so just bear with me. First, this event is being recorded, so you'll be able to view it at your leisure. Just keep an eye out for an email from us with that replay link. You should get it in a couple of days. Second, each of today's 3 sessions will have time for a 5 to 10 minute audience Q&A. So as your questions occur to you, go ahead and throw them into the Q&A area of your console as they come up, and we're going to try to get to as many of them as possible. Third, during today's final session, we are giving away some high-end Bose noise-canceling headphones, but you must be present to win, so do stay on for the entire event. And finally, we have some great resources for you from our sponsors, Rubrik and CoreView. They're available right now on your console, so go ahead and check those out, download them, ask them some questions. It's because of our sponsors underwriting this content that we can bring you this summit today. So we thank them for sponsoring and supporting the community, and in turn, we ask you to go ahead and ask them some questions, check out their resources so we can bring you more events like this in the future. Now on to the first session of today's summit. This is a great one. This session is titled Cloud Security Automation 101, What You Can and Should Automate and What to Leave Alone. And the speaker is Brian Posey, who is a frequent speaker here. You may know him, but if you don't, Brian is a freelance technology author and a 22-time Microsoft MVP. Throughout his career, Brian has written or contributed to dozens of IT books, created numerous full-length video training courses, and published thousands of blog posts on a huge variety of IT and space-related topics. You can find some of his columns on Virtualization and Cloud Review, in fact. Many of those blog posts can also be found on his Posey Tips and Tricks column on redmondmag.com. Brian, we're so glad to have you here today. Go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thank you so much, Gladys. Hello, greetings, and welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to get to present this particular topic today because I think it's something that's really timely, and it's the sort of thing that can be beneficial to a lot of organizations out there. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is to kind of take a high-level approach to security automation. More specifically, I'm going to look at what you can automate, what you should automate, and perhaps even more importantly than that, what you shouldn't automate. So that's where I'm going to be going with my presentation, and then I believe the speaker who's coming on after me is going to be talking about some automation best practices. I'm sure that's going to be a great presentation. I wish I had the time to sit in on it today. At any rate, I want to begin by talking about automation in general, because IT automation is one of those things that at one time it was a nice to have. Today I would call it absolutely essential. Because as IT pros, we're all busy, and oftentimes automation is the only way to get our jobs done. I mean, I wish I could hear the audience members right now because I would love to ask the question, how many of you are so bogged down in meetings and things like that all day long that it's hard to even squeeze in time to do your job? I know that's definitely a problem for me sometimes. I'm guessing that probably is for you too. And that's where automation really comes into play, because automation can handle all of those really mundane, repetitive type tasks so that you can focus on the more important things in those situations where you have more free time. So automation is typically the only way to avoid being completely overwhelmed, and it can also help to prevent human error. Because if there's a task that has to be done repetitively over and over and over, and it's something that's a normal part of your job, it's easy to get to the point where you're complacent and you're basically just clicking next, next, next. And human error can creep in situations like that. And automation ensures that processes are being done in a consistent way every single time that they're performed. And as I'm going to talk about a little bit later on, consistency is extremely important when we start talking about security. So there are numerous benefits to automation, and this is especially true when we start talking about security automation. So what I want to do is I want to spend the first part of my presentation talking about some of the benefits of security automation. And then from there, I'm going to go into a discussion of what you can and should automate. and then I'll wrap up the presentation by talking about what you shouldn't automate. So that's kind of my plan for this presentation. So what are some benefits of IT security automation? Well, there are quite a few. The first one, as I already alluded to a little bit, is time saving, because automation reduces the amount of time that you're going to have to spend on routine and repetitive tasks. And the nice side effect to that is that it allows the security teams to focus on other things that are arguably more important. Now, some might be quick to say, hey, those really repetitive and routine tasks, those are important. And I'll be the first to admit that that can absolutely be true. I don't dispute that in the least. But what I'm thinking is that if you're able to automate those really repetitive types of things, it allows you to work on more big picture type items. You know, as I talk about this, I can't help but think about the last corporate job that I ever had. And one of the challenges that I had in that corporate job was that there were quite a few strategic initiatives that I wanted to implement for the organization. There were some major infrastructure changes that I wanted to put into place as a result of some of the technology changes that were happening at the time. And there were several big projects that I wanted to take on. And if anybody's ever managed a major IT project, you know it's not a simple endeavor. You have to get buy-in from all of the key stakeholders. There are budgetary issues, never minding planning all of the logistics. How's this going to work? How's it going to integrate with what we've already got? And the challenge that I had was that I spent my day so busy putting out fires and dealing with all sorts of corporate stuff that went on that it was really hard to find the time to deal with those strategic initiatives that I wanted to put into place. Well, automation can definitely help with that. And this is especially true when we start talking about security automation and enabling the security teams to take back some of the time that they have during the day to be able to focus on more strategic activities that can help to better secure the organization. Another benefit is consistent execution. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, that when you use automation, you can ensure that key tasks are performed in a very consistent way. And consistency is super important because when you perform activities in a consistent way, it means that anything that is done in an abnormal way really stands out, and that makes it a lot easier to spot. So if you've got protocols in place that require particular activities to be performed the same way every time, then if an attacker manages to infiltrate your organization, they're going to be doing things in a way that's a bit abnormal. And that's going to be way easier to spot, whether it's you spotting it or some sort of automated detection that's attached with spotting it. It's going to make it way easier to detect those activities if everything's done in a super consistent manner. And, you know, in some ways, the issues of consistent execution and time saving can really kind of go hand in hand. Something I was just now thinking about, but if you think about something really, really simple like Windows installation, there are a million different options that occur during the installation process. You're prompted to select your time zone, to select your installation path. You know, there's a whole bunch of things like that. And many, many years ago, I think it was stemmed back all the way to the 90s, Microsoft gave us the option to create unattended installations. For anybody who might not be familiar with that, you create what's called an unattended file, and that file contains the answers to all of the prompts that are displayed during the installation process. And by using that, you can install Windows in a predetermined way. You've basically already answered all of the installation prompts. And Microsoft originally intended this as a mechanism for installing Windows at scale. So that way you don't have to sit down at the terminal on every single machine that you're installing Windows onto and click next, 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 and answer this prompt and that prompt. Instead, this unattended installation file handles all of that for you to make it more easy to deploy Windows at scale. So if you look at something like that, you're definitely saving time because you've automated the installation, but you're also ensuring consistency. You don't have to worry about somebody making a mistake and forgetting to configure a certain option during the operating system deployment process. The automation handles all of that for you. So I spent a bit more time talking about those particular benefits than I really planned on, but let's talk about some others. Another potential benefit of security automation is real-time detection. So if a threat comes in and you're not using any sort of automation, then you're really dependent on your security staff to recognize that that threat is occurring and to be able to take corrective action. If you bring in automation, then there's a good chance that that automation is going to pick up on that threat more quickly than a human might be able to. And this real-time detection comes in a lot of different forms. And in some ways, this is something that's been used for years and years and years. If you think about something as simple as malware detection, most anti-malware software scans every file that it comes into contact with, and it looks for signatures that indicate something is malicious within that file. That's a type of automated threat detection that happens in real time. Your anti-malware software picks up on a threat way more quickly than a human would be able to. A human might not even realize that anything's wrong until it's too late. Well, the same types of principle can be expanded on out to other types of threat detection. And then that also leads to reduced response time, because if an automation engine detects that a threat is present, it can also quickly isolate the affected system. It may be able to block malicious traffic, and it might be able to even initiate certain incident response protocols, thereby reducing the amount of time that it takes to respond to the incident. Now, again, this is going to look completely different in every situation depending on the types of threats that we're talking about and the types of automation software that's being used, but these are just some of the benefits. So another potential benefit is advanced analytics. Now, automation mechanisms vary greatly across the spectrum. Automation can consist of anything from a really simple PowerShell script on up to third-party software that's based on AI and machine learning. So there's a huge range of automation. Not every automation product is going to have every capability, but one of the benefits that you can sometimes derive is that you may be able to perform advanced analytics. So let's suppose for a moment that you've got something that uses machine learning and it learns what's normal for your organization. It may be able to detect sophisticated threats that might have been missed by manual processes. Another benefit is continuous monitoring. And again, this is something that we've had for years and years, but it's still a benefit. If you've got a human who's responsible for monitoring your security, well, that human is only going to be able to stare at a screen for so long. They're going to have to take breaks. They go home at the end of the day. It's not realistic for a human to just stare at a console and be expected to detect every single threat that comes in. Automation doesn't have to take a break. It can monitor things on a continuous basis, and as technology improves, it can improve right along with it. Other potential benefits revolve around scalability, and this is something that I talked about a little while ago with regard to my Windows unattended installation example. So scalability really revolves around handling large volumes of data or managing large numbers of systems. So automation is what enables the processing of these large volumes of data or the managing of large numbers of systems without you having to scale up your IT staff in the process. So this is what's going to support a growing infrastructure. As an organization gets bigger, they acquire more and more systems, things become increasingly sophisticated. You don't want to also have to scale up your IT staff because that increases the organization's cost. It would be better if the existing staff is able to handle those systems in an automated way so that the existing IT employees don't necessarily have to work any harder. Automation is handling all of the heavy lifting for them. Other potential benefits revolve around cost savings. So if an organization has automated a lot of the routine tasks, then they're able to use those security personnel that they've got on staff to do other things. And this is something that I talked about earlier. You automate the simple stuff so that the security team can focus on strategic initiatives or on things that really require a human in the loop. Also, automation can help you to reduce downtime. Let's suppose that you had a major security breach. What's going to happen next? Are you going to have to take critical systems offline? Are those systems going to drop offline as a result of the attack? Downtime can absolutely occur as a result of a security breach. So if you're using security automation and you're able to instantly detect an attack in progress and you're able to thwart that attack before any real damage can occur, well, then those incidents are going to reduce your downtime or in many cases even prevent the downtime from ever occurring. And that in turn reduces your cost. because anytime a mission-critical application goes down, there's a certain cost associated with that. And oftentimes that cost is very, very high. And it doesn't even have to be a system entirely going offline. Just a security breach alone can cause major costs, particularly if something containing personally identifiable information was breached. Because at that point, you're going to probably lose some customers who aren't happy that their information was compromised. You may have to provide identity theft and insurance to all of those customers whose information was leaked. There may be regulatory fines that come into play. So there can be extreme costs associated with any security breach that occurs. So if you're able to use automation and prevent those sort of breaches, then that in the long run is definitely going to go a long way towards saving your company money. Other benefits revolve around the issue of improved compliance. You can automate internal audits so that way you know exactly where you stand, so that when a real compliance audit occurs, you're already prepared for that. You've already spotted any security deficiencies that may exist, and you've addressed those deficiencies. Also, consistent reporting can be done through automation. If you're using automated reporting tools, you can ensure that data is gathered in a consistent way each time those reports are run, and you can make sure that any variances that may show up from one report to the other are actual variances, and that they aren't just showing up as a result of a change in the way that the data was being collected or a change in the way that the report is being run or something like that. You can verify that those variances that you're seeing are real, as opposed to just being induced by human error as a result of performing the reporting process in a slightly different way. So what else can we do with automation? Well, another one is threat hunting. I've talked a lot about incident prevention through automation, but you can also use automation to do threat hunting. In other words, doing deep scans of all of your systems and your networks just to see if there's something that's hidden out there that maybe you have missed, maybe your analytics software has missed. So threat hunting is definitely something that can be handled by automation. And then we have behavioral analysis. The idea being that automation software can look at end-user behavior and spot anomalies that might signal a potential security issue. So let's suppose for a moment that you've got a particular employee that every Monday morning they come into the office, they log in at 9 o'clock, and they open a particular application. And they do this as a normal part of their job every single week. They've been there for years, and they've always done things that way. Well, that's a recognizable pattern. You know that if somebody logs in as that user and they're logging on from the corporate network and they open that particular application at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, well, that's probably legitimate activity because there is a historical pattern that you know that that's a normal activity. Now, if on the other hand, somebody logs in as that user from a remote location, maybe in another country, at an abnormal time of the day, and then they open that application, and maybe they even do something really abnormal with that application, well, those are all red flags indicating that something is happening a little bit differently than normal. And that might be something that your security team wants to take a look at. Well, automation can help with that type of behavioral analysis. They can spot when users are doing things out of the norm, and that might signal a rogue user. It might signal an account that's been compromised and is being used by a threat actor. Or it could just be a situation in which the user is being asked to do something a little bit different as a part of their job. So it could be totally innocent, but either way, it's something that your security team probably wants to take a closer look at. So what else? Automation can also help with reducing human errors. And this is something that I talked about a little bit earlier with regard to the Windows unattended installation example that I gave. But the idea is that if you've got a task that's really boring and repetitive and has to be done over and over, no matter how many times a person might have done it, there's a chance they're going to make a mistake the next time that they do it. It could be that the person has done this so many times they don't really feel like they have to concentrate on it. They're having a conversation with somebody while they're completing this task, and mistakes happen. So automation can help to prevent these types of human errors that occur during manual processes. Automation can also be used to standardize processes. So in other words, let's go back to my example of installing Windows. There are a lot of different ways that Windows can be installed. there are a million different options that are presented during the installation process, and depending on which options you select, that determines how Windows is ultimately installed. Well, there's a difference between installing Windows and installing Windows according to all of Microsoft's current best practices. So when you use automation, whether we're talking about installing Windows or whether we're talking about some other process that occurs in your organization, when you use automation, you're able to ensure that whatever process it is that you're automating is done according to your organization's standards, and that it's done according to industry best practices and according to any compliance requirements that you might have in place that you have to adhere to. So another thing that you can do with automation is to ensure that comprehensive logging is being used. And you can also do log analysis as a part of that. Because pretty much every system that's out there creates really detailed logs, but being able to parse those logs, that's a whole different story, and that's something that automation can greatly assist you with. Automation can also help with continuous security improvement within your organization, because think about what I said earlier about automation learning patterns and behaviors and that sort of thing. Well, it learns from those patterns and behaviors that are considered normal, but depending on what type of automation software you're using, automation can also learn from any incidents that may have occurred in the past. And it can use that knowledge to help improve its detection capabilities in the future, because now it knows what that type of attack looks like, and so it gets better at spotting those types of attacks in the future. And automation can also help with adaptive security. Automation can enable adaptive security measures that can adjust to evolving threats and changing environments. So what that really means is that over time, technology changes, and because technology changes, the methods that threat actors use to exploit that technology also evolve. And so when you're using automation, if you're using the proper automation techniques, that automation can adapt to these types of changes and ensure that you're able to detect the latest types of threats that may be out there. So I've spent quite a bit of time talking about the benefits of automation. Now I want to get into a discussion of what should you automate. So there are a lot of different options for automation. Where should you position your resources? What types of things should you automate? Well, before I get into that discussion, let me just say that every organization's needs are different. What might be best for a super huge enterprise isn't necessarily going to be the best option for a small organization that has 5 employees. So you certainly have to look at the organization's needs, their budget, and things like that. So beyond looking at the cost, you have to look at the level of IT expertise that exists, because automation tools are not all created equally. I've used some that are point and click. They're really, really easy to set up and to use. And then there are others that are command line only that are really difficult to configure. They require a lot of manual scripting. And maybe they're not the best fit unless you have a lot of IT expertise on staff that can not only deploy that technology, but they can also figure out how to take corrective action if something goes wrong with it. So you have to consider the IT expertise. You also have to consider staffing resources. So in other words, how many people do you have on your IT staff? Is this automation going to benefit them? Is it going to provide an additional burden because now it's something else that they have to go out and they have to maintain and keep working and troubleshoot if something goes wrong? So you have to think about that side of automation as well. Yes, there are tremendous benefits to automation, but you don't want those benefits to be completely undermined by having yet another system that you have to maintain. The burden associated with maintaining that automation should never exceed the benefits that you're getting from using automation. And so with all of that said, the next several slides that I'm going to talk about discuss some things that you can potentially automate as a way of benefiting your organization from a security standpoint. So the first one shouldn't really come as any surprise, threat detection and monitoring. And again, this can come in a lot of different forms. One of the most obvious is intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems. They can be used to automate the detection of potential threats and intrusions in real time. Another one is security information and event management, or SIEM as it's sometimes called. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not entirely sure on the pronunciation of SIEM, but no matter. So this has to do with event log management. Now, the idea behind this is that every system that you've got generates events. Typically, there's going to be a rather large event log, maybe even multiple event logs, as is the case with Windows. So you need some sort of automated system to go in and parse those event logs and to derive any sort of insight from them. I can't help but think back to the early days of Windows, specifically when Windows NT was released back in the 90s. At that time, there was actually a question on the Microsoft certification exams pertaining to how large should your event logs be. And the Microsoft best practice at the time was to limit your event logs so that they never grow beyond a whopping 1 megabyte in size. And the reason why Microsoft made that recommendation, well, there were two reasons. One was because the systems at that time were nowhere near as capable as the systems are today. So you didn't want to run the risk of filling up your hard disk on your server with event logs. But the main reason why Microsoft made that recommendation, and the reason that's a lot more relevant to this presentation, is because an event log that's 1 megabyte in size, at least back then, could contain thousands and thousands of log entries. And once the event log exceeded 1 megabyte, it became completely impractical to manage. If you were trying to track down a particular event, good luck. There was so much noise contained in the event log and so many thousands of log entries. And never mind that the systems of the time had trouble parsing an event log that contained so many entries. So Microsoft's best practices were to keep your event logs small. Well, today that's not the case at all. The Windows operating system creates all kinds of different event logs, many of those being dedicated to specific system services. The problem is being able to find a particular event in the event log. So this is where automated tools can come into play. But beyond that, if you think about it, in your environment, you don't have just one system. You've probably got any number of servers, and every single one of those contains a number of event logs. So the idea behind security information and event management, or SIEM, is that you can consolidate all of the event logs from all of these different systems and then use automated software to go through those event logs and parse them and look for things across systems that might signal signs of an attack or a security deficiency or something that you need to take a look at. So another area where automation can be used is network traffic analysis. You can use automated tools to monitor network traffic for anything that's really unusual or that might signal malicious activity. You can also use automation for vulnerability management. So you can do things like automated scanning, regularly scanning your system for vulnerabilities that may exist. That might be known vulnerabilities within an application that can be addressed through patch management. That could be a network vulnerability that needs to be addressed, maybe an outdated application. So there are certainly vulnerabilities that need to be, or that can be detected through automated scanning. And the same can also be said for patch management. Your patch management system can use automation to look for systems that haven't received patches that need to be put in place. Now, there is a fine line here because you don't want an automated system to just automatically deploy patches the second they become available. It's important to test those patches first to make sure that they're not going to cause any harm on your network. But once you've verified that a patch is good and that it should be applied, then you need to have an automated system in place to not only apply those patches, but also to verify that the patches are in place and that no systems have been missed. Other things that you can do with automation is automated alerts. And this is an important one. If your automation system detects a threat or it detects some security deficiency that needs to be addressed, well, you need to know about that. So it would be good to send an automated alert to make you and any other key stakeholders aware of that problem. Response orchestration, that's another thing that you can do with automation. So in other words, let's suppose that your automation software detects a breach that's in progress. Well, you can take corrective action automatically to shut down that potential breach. Now, you have to be really careful about this one. There are some things that it's generally going to be safe to do, such as instantly blocking a known malicious IP address or something like that. But there are other responses that you really do have to be careful with, and that's something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. So something else that you can use automation for is threat intelligence. This means automating the gathering and analysis of threat intelligence from various data sources. I talked about event log consolidation. Certainly that's a form of this. And then threat hunting, using automation to do deep scans of your network and of all of your servers to search for threats that may have gone undetected in the past. You can also use automation for access management. You can automate the provisioning and deprovisioning of user accounts and permissions. I know of organizations, for example, that have user account creation and user account deletion tied to their HR software. So in other words, if a new employee gets hired, the moment that that employee goes into the HR database, an automated procedure will automatically create a user account for that employee. And when that employee leaves the organization, that employee's user account is automatically deactivated. So that's what I'm talking about with regard to automation around account provisioning and deprovisioning. And again, that's just one way that you could do it. You could automate the account provisioning and deprovisioning process in whatever way makes the most sense for your own organization's unique needs. You can use automation to implement automated multi-factor authentication solutions, and you can even use automation for self-service password reset. Now, this is one that tends to be somewhat controversial because there are some who absolutely believe in self-service password reset. In other words, a user forgets their password, they can go into an automated portal and reset it themselves without having to contact the help desk. There are others who think that that's a bad thing from a security standpoint. You have to do whatever is right for your own organization, but I will tell you that Microsoft does encourage the use of self-service password reset because, for one thing, if users are able to reset their own passwords, then that means that you don't have to worry about the user's passwords or even the ability to reset passwords being delegated to the help desk. So you don't have to worry about a rogue help desk employee taking advantage of having the permission to reset a user's password as a way of exploiting that user's account. Also, if a user knows that they have the ability to reset their own password at any time, they're more likely to use good, secure passwords as opposed to using something really simple and weak that's going to be easier to remember, because they know they know that if they forget that password, then they're not going to have to worry about making an embarrassing phone call to the help desk to get that password reset. So just something to think about. So other ways that automation can help you is with compliance and auditing, and I touched on this one a little bit earlier. One of the things that you can do is to perform automated audits within your organization. So these aren't the official audits that are done by compliance auditors who come in from the outside world. These are internal audits that you can run yourself just to make sure that you are complying with all of the necessary regulations and that there's nothing that you need to take care of before a real audit occurs. And of course, you can also automate reporting. You can generate automated compliance and security reports for your organization. Another thing that you can automate is endpoint security. And this is one of these topics that I honestly could do an entire presentation on. So I don't want to go too deep in the weeds on this one, but it is something that I consider to be really important. So the essence of endpoint security monitoring is just monitoring the devices that your users work from to make sure that they're configured in a secure manner and that they don't contain any threats. However, what I will say is that if you're really interested in endpoint security, then one of the best approaches for that is likely to go ahead and set up some sort of remote desktop solution, whether we're talking about VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure or DAS or desktop as a service. The idea being hosting desktops remotely, either in the cloud or in your own data center, and letting users connect to those desktops. And there's a few advantages to that. One advantage is that because those remote desktops are configured by your own organization, you can configure them based on your own security needs. So you don't have to worry about users interacting with key business applications from a secure, or an insecure rather, operating system running on a personal device. You know that the only operating systems that are going to interact with those applications are configured securely because you set them up, you configured them, you know they're secure. Now, having said that, even if you do use VDI or desktop as a service, it's a really good idea to put some sort of system in place to check device health, because end users could be connecting to those desktops or remote desktops from personal devices. And those personal devices could contain malware, they could contain outdated operating systems, they could contain who knows what. Now, just the simple fact that remote desktop is being used goes a long way towards mitigating a lot of those security threats. But at a bare minimum, a user is going to have to enter a set of credentials to connect to their remote desktop. And if that device happens to contain a keylogger, well, then that user's account could very quickly become compromised. So it's important to establish some sort of enrollment process for those endpoint devices and make sure that when the user enrolls those devices, that there's a health check that occurs, ensuring that those devices are adherent to some minimum security requirements that you've put in place. So again, I don't want to go too deep in the woods on that one, but it's just something I wanted to talk about for a second. So what else? Automation can also help with things like data loss prevention. So it can automate the monitoring and enforcement of data protection policies to prevent data leaks. And there are mechanisms built into Office 365 that can help with this. Those mechanisms can look for patterns in, say, outbound email messages. It can look to see if an email contains a credit card number or a social security number, things like that, and then automatically put a halt to that if these types of data are detected in an outbound email. You can also use automation for encryption management. Automation can be used to make sure that anything sensitive is automatically encrypted, regardless of any manual processes that may exist. And of course, you can use automation for user behavior analytics. In other words, looking for abnormal behavior from end users, as I discussed earlier. Other benefits or other potential use cases for automation are phishing detection and prevention. You can filter your emails to try to remove phishing messages, and you can also use automation for end-user phishing training. There are any number of phishing attack simulators out there. There's one that's native to Microsoft 365, but there are some third-party ones as well that you can use to launch simulated phishing attacks against your end users in an automated way, in an effort to train them not to fall for phishing attacks. So automation can go a really long way toward helping an organization to keep its IT resources secure. I think we've pretty well established that. I've talked about numerous use cases for security automation, and really I've just kind of barely touched the surface. There are plenty more that I didn't discuss. But in spite of all of these potential use cases, there are some things that you should not do with automation. So in the few minutes that I've got left, let's go ahead and talk about some of those. One thing that you shouldn't do with automation is strategic decision making. For example, you probably don't want to use automation for security policy development. You know, if I were to sit down right now, open up ChatGPT, and ask it to come up with a security policy for my organization, I have absolutely no doubt that it would craft a security policy. But it would probably be very foolish for me to blindly adhere to that security policy in my own organization, because that security policy is going to be generic. ChatGPT knows nothing about the size of my organization, the way that it's structured, how things are set up, what systems I'm running. So a security policy really needs to, at the very least, be reviewed by a human, preferably crafted by a human, because you need something that's going to make sense for your own organization. Another thing that you shouldn't use automation for is risk assessment. Risk assessment is really one of those things that needs to be done by a human, because when it comes to risk, everybody's got a different idea of what level of risk a particular situation brings. So you really need that human intuition when it comes to risk assessment. You know, one of the things that I've been really fortunate to get to do is to fly on a parabolic flight campaign as a part of the NASA Flight Opportunities Program. And part of preparing for that is that whatever experiment you're bringing on board, you have to perform a risk assessment. And it's a really detailed process. Now, I won't go into, all the intricacies of that, but what I will say is that you have to identify every potential risk that you can think of. And for each one, you have to give it 2 scores. You have to give it a severity score. In other words, if this risk were to happen, how bad is it going to be? What's the worst that could happen? And the other score you have to give it is the likelihood of it happening. And I found that taking this approach to risk management doesn't just work for the NASA Flight Opportunities Program. It also works really, really well for IT. But sadly, this isn't the type of thing that AI and automation can realistically achieve for you. It might be able to give you these scores, but those scores probably aren't going to be truly representative of the real world. So when it comes to risk assessment, that's something that should ideally be done by a human. Also, incident handling and escalation. So let's suppose for a moment that you've had a security incident, whether that's a breach or a critical system has been shut down, something like that. You might use AI to initially respond to it. You might, for example, block a known malicious IP address. You might isolate a key system. But that's kind of the extent of what you would want to do with automation, because automation can do more harm than good if it's left to respond to an incident on its own. Imagine a situation where your your security automation software detects an incident and it decides to shut down a mission-critical application. And all of a sudden, you're losing millions of dollars for every minute that this system is offline. That's probably not the best approach to dealing with a situation like that. So when it comes to handling an incident and escalation, you can do some low-level tasks using automation, but you probably don't want to let automation make any big decisions for you. And that also goes for communications that related to that incident. Yes, the IT staff and the security staff need to know what's going on. That's a given, and it's perfectly okay to get that automation software to provide that information to them through an automated alert. But you wouldn't want that software to automatically alert, say, regulators. Yes, you might have a duty to report to regulators when an incident has occurred, but you probably don't want that notification to go out while the incident is in progress. You want to deal with that incident first, find out what's going on, get the incident resolved, and then do any necessary reporting. Likewise, you wouldn't want the automation software to fire off an email to your CEO. I guarantee you would get a phone call about that one. So communications, you have to be really careful with what you would allow automation to do. Also, advanced threat hunting and root cause analysis. Now, in some ways, automation works really, really well for this, but there's some level of interpretation that has to be done by a human. You can't rely exclusively on automation with regard to advanced threat hunting and root cause analysis. Let me just say, for example, that there's some really, really good software out there that can do root cause analytics. But the problem with that is that those types of software packages can't determine intent. So let's suppose that an attack stems from one of your users, and your root cause analysis software traces the path of that attack, and they narrow it down, and they tell you it was initiated by this user at this time from this device. Okay, great. What it's not telling you is, do you have a rogue user on your hands? Was that account compromised and the attack actually stemmed from outside your organization? Did the attack occur as a result of social engineering? So if the user's account was compromised, was a social engineering attack used to steal the user's password? Did the user use the password to log on to something they shouldn't, and that's how the account was compromised? So there's a lot that you can't tell through automation. So I'm not saying don't use automation for advanced threat hunting and root cause analytics. Just don't rely solely on automation for those purposes. Another thing that you probably don't want to use automation for is compliance interpretation. Because a lot of times, and this varies from one set of regulations to the other, but a lot of times the regulations will say, okay, you have to have a mechanism in place to accomplish X, Y, and Z. We don't care what the mechanism is. You just have to have it, and it has to accomplish these objectives, and you have to be able to definitively prove that it is accomplishing those objectives. Well, you probably don't want security automation to be making those types of decisions for you and interpreting the regulatory requirements, because when you meet with regulators or auditors, you have to be able to justify any decisions that you've made. And you can't really get away with saying, oh, well, that decision was made by AI. We don't know why it came with that. That's something that a human really needs to be involved in. And the same with privacy concerns. Any decisions that involve user privacy or disclosing that a breach happened or anything where there's ethical implications, that really needs to be handled by a human. Also, you may want to rethink the use of AI and security automation when it comes to tailored security architectures. So if you've got a lot of custom systems, you probably don't want to use an out-of-the-box security automation tool to monitor something that's totally abnormal from anything else in the industry. You're probably going to need something that is custom-built to handle that custom-built system. Another thing that you may want to rethink is using automation for security testing. Now, you can do some level of penetration testing using automation software. There's some great tools out there for that. But ideally, you need a security team that can augment the capabilities that are found in that automation software. Because to really do a good penetration test, you have to think like a criminal. You have to think of attack vectors that might not necessarily be built into your automation software, and think of creative approaches. When you run automated software for penetration testing, it's basically just going through a checklist. Okay, does this vulnerability exist? No. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Does this vulnerability exist? No. So a lot of times, humans can do things with regard to penetration testing that automated software just can't do. We also have relationship management, talking about things like interacting with your security vendors, end-user education and training. Automation can play an assistive role with these, but you don't want to depend on it completely. And again, to revisit a point that I made earlier, you really don't want to allow automation to handle any critical response actions. You don't want automation to have the authority to shut down a critical system or to make a major change to your infrastructure as a result of something that it's detected. Those types of decisions really, really need to be made by a human. Automation can provide guidance. That's perfectly okay. The automation can say, okay, here's what happened, here's what I recommend that you do, but ultimately the decision on whether or not to do that needs to be made by a human. And I'm just about out of time, but one thing that I want to point out before I wrap this up is that automation can be extremely beneficial, even essential with regard to keeping your organization secure. But even so, there can be consequences to relying too heavily on any type of IT automation. And I'm not even talking about those things that I said that you probably shouldn't automate. I'm just talking about, okay, you've automated all of the key security tools that need to take place. So your security is largely automated, but there's something called over-reliance. And there can be consequences to relying too heavily on AI and automation. So I want to spend my last couple of minutes talking about what some of those consequences are. So one of the big consequences is complacency. In other words, you get employees who get just a little bit too comfortable and like, okay, I don't really have to go look for threats today because AI is doing all that for me. That's an example of complacency, and there are quite a few other potential examples of that as well. Apathy is another thing that you have to consider. Apathy can happen when everything's automated. You might have employees like, I don't feel like looking at the security report today, and there's really no consequences to not looking at that report because AI is handling everything for me. Nothing ever shows up on the report, and nobody will be any the wiser if I don't take the time to review that report. So apathy is a big potential consequence of over-reliance on automation. Another one is skills degradation. In other words, because everything is automated, the IT employees and security employees don't have to do as much, and therefore they start seeing their skills erode. An example of this from outside of IT is somebody who maybe when they were younger spent a lot of time driving a car that was a stick shift, and then stick shifts kind of went away. They drive an automatic for years and years, and they forget how to drive a stick. The same thing can happen with regard to IT skills. If you're not in the habit of using certain skills, then it's really easy to forget those skills. So skill degradation can be a very real consequence of over-reliance on automation. Also, the inability to distinguish between real events and false positives or false negatives. So you've got all of these automated systems that you've put into place. They're keeping an eye on security, and one day you get an alert. How do you know if that alert is real? Without having the proper IT skills, you're at the mercy of that automated system. You have to just assume that what that automated system is telling you is accurate, where in reality, that event may or may not be accurate. So this goes right back to skills degradation. Just because you have a lot of automation in place doesn't mean that you can allow those IT skills to erode, because you have to have the skills that are necessary to determine if what the automation software is telling you is accurate or not. Similarly, another potential consequence to over-relying on automation is automation errors. let's say that you've got a super elaborate PowerShell script that automates some key security task in your organization. And the script works reliably over an extended period of time, and then one day, for whatever reason, that script fails. Does anybody in your organization know how to go in and debug that script and figure out what went wrong? So this kind of goes back to the whole issue of skills degradation, the point being that you can't rely on automation to the point that if something goes wrong, you have no clue how to fix it. Another one that is often overlooked is dependency on a functioning system. So let's say for a moment that you've got an automation engine that scans all of your organization's security, but it's dependent on a particular database server or a domain controller or something like that. If that particular system goes down, then all of your automation goes down with it. And so you have to plan for situations like that, make sure that you've got the necessary redundancy in place so that you know how to deal with that. Finally, exploitation by attackers. I mentioned earlier the importance of operating in a consistent way and of adhering to strict security protocols that outline exactly how certain procedures are supposed to be performed. Well, that type of consistency helps you ensure uniformity, and it makes any adverse, abnormal events really stand out. The problem with that, and kind of the flip side to that, is that it also makes it really predictable to attackers. So an attacker knows you're going to respond to an incident in a particular way, and in some cases they may be able to exploit that. So with that said, I am just about out of time, possibly even over a little bit, but I want to try to answer a few questions if I can.
Great stuff. Yes, John, excuse me, Brian, we have a couple of questions here from you. I'll try to sneak in as much as I can. One from Paul here. Paul asks, can achieving and maintaining near zero-touch automation and cloud security still be achieved easily with these following three factors in mind? And the three factors are scale, a large hybrid or remote workforce, and three, complex governance considerations.
That is really going to the answer to that is really going to depend on the specifics. What systems they've got in place, what those hybrid systems look like, what their hybrid workforce looks like, how they're operating. Can it be done? Hypothetically, yes. But again, sometimes the devil is in the details. So the answer is largely going to come down to their specific configuration.
Great. Here's one from Jennifer. Do you find it to be more effective to use homegrown scripts or AI applications?
I think it really kind of depends on the use case. In my own organization, I use a combination. I'm really big into PowerShell. I love writing PowerShell scripts, so there's a lot that I've automated in my own organization using PowerShell. But at the same time, there are certain tasks that PowerShell really isn't up to the job for, and you're probably going to be better off using something that comes from a vendor. Just to give you an example, PowerShell was never really designed for machine learning or AI. So if you want a solution that's based on AI, then you're probably going to have to go with a commercial solution as opposed to scripting something yourself.
Great. And then here's a question from Tim. And you touched on this also at the end of your presentation there, Brian, but Tim asks, can using an AI-based security tool undermine your organization's security or privacy?
Yeah, in certain situations it absolutely could. Probably the simplest way is, okay, you've brought in this third-party tool and it's based on software, and like any other software application, there's the chance that it could contain vulnerabilities. So it doesn't happen very often, but there are stories out there that have happened from time to time where an attacker has actually used a security tool to exploit a vulnerability, or rather they've exploited a vulnerability within a security tool and used that security tool that was supposed to be protecting the organization as a point of entry.
And finally, I think this is the last question we have time for, from Kurt. Is there a way to integrate AI into an existing script?
Yeah, if you've got the coding skills, you can do that for sure. My recommendation would be to take a look at Python, because most of the homegrown AI applications that I've seen are based on Python. Another thing that you can do is, if you want to create integrations based on ChatGPT, ChatGPT has an API that you can use. And all you have to do is get a hold of I forget what they call it, basically a key that identifies your account. And you can integrate that key into a PowerShell script, and you can make calls directly to ChatGPT from PowerShell. So that's a really easy way of integrating AI into a script.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, here to moderate the second session of our Cloud Security Automation Summit, brought to you by Rubrik and CoreView. This session is titled Security Automation Best Practices and features John O'Neill Sr., whose roles over the last 30 years in the IT industry have ranged from software architect to senior executive to consultant to author. He's been involved in everything from multinational networking, messaging, and communications projects to ERP, HRIS, and security operations. He's a 4-time recipient of Microsoft's MVP Award, including an MVP in security, and he has developed technology training courseware and written numerous books and articles. John, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
Thanks, David. It's great to be here today. I'm really looking forward to this. I always love when we can get together and meet with the community and get back and cover some great topics. As always, I appreciate the wonderful introduction. Thank you. And we're going to jump right into it because we've got a lot of content today. And we're going to begin by just kind of reviewing some of the importance of cloud security automation, some of the basics behind it, that sort of thing. Many of you, it'll be review. Some of you, maybe some new concepts for you to think about and that sort of thing. By the way, I love to make this an interactive session. This is all about you. And if you have a question or, you'd like me to dive into something or whatnot, just type it in the Q&A as we go, and I'll handle them in flight. At the end, there will be some time for some Q&A, hopefully, but we kind of like to do it interactively throughout the session, or at least I do. So with that, let's talk about kind of some of the things that really drive our cloud security automation. Well, first off, kind of the obvious one, almost every company out there, from small mom and pop to Fortune 100, is using the cloud in some capacity. And the numbers around the cloud market are crazy, right? Almost $1 trillion by next year. Unfortunately, that comes with a lot of problems. And one of those is, security challenges. Obviously, everybody, unless you've kind of been in a sandbox today with earmuffs on, knows about the large CrowdStrike Microsoft outage that is affecting us globally. Everything from air travel to police 911 to news networks and hospitals, everything is affected today. And while they say it's not directly related to a cyber attack or that sort of thing, certainly is related to a patch and an update, which is, one of those things that we really have to do and often have to do faster than we should and that sort of thing because of cybersecurity threats. So, even in a loose form, it is related. And this certainly applies to what we're talking about with the security challenges around cloud security automation. One of the things that I really want to talk about here is the misconfigured cloud settings. Many of us have cloud environments where we have inherited them from somebody who set them up using what my good friend Dave Kula likes to call the next finish method. And that's essentially where they click through Wizard and they just said, oh, this sounds good, boom, 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 got to the end and like, oh, look, it's all set up. Well, that rarely results in a properly configured environment. I want everybody to remember this. There is a huge difference between working and working well, right? That one extra word at the end changes the entire perspective. So why do we need to automate, right? Why can't we do these things manually? Well, one reason is we all, at least everyone I know, has limited IT resources these days. We're dealing with smaller budgets or more stretched budgets, constrained resources where people are doing more, right? So hiring has been strong in the IT industry for a year or so, but they're still hiring less than what's required to properly care and feed and evolve the security system that the organization's using. Really don't care whether it's educational, commercial, for-profit, not-for-profit. Everyone I go into, they're adopting more and more technology, and while they may have hired additional resources, they still don't have enough to deal with everything, okay? And one way that we can get around that problem is through automation. Instead of us having to manually complete tasks, we automate them so that they happen in the background and we can put our time towards something else. It, of course, takes care of repetitive tasks. There's a side concern with that, and that is that a lot of IT pros, we kind of get really tired of doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over. We like to handle new challenges and get into new areas. That's kind of why we got into high tech in the first place. We have reduction of human error. Even the best typist, the person with the most strict focus, can make a mistake and does make a mistake periodically. And that mistake can create a real issue. The other is that almost every environment, every cloud deployment is becoming more broad. So, maybe a couple years ago, we're just using a couple resources in the cloud, whether it be, identity management or maybe some AVD type stuff. But now we tend to have these very broad ecosystems, everything from, collaboration tools to security tools, all of that. It's becoming much harder to manage manually. That leads us organically into some of the business benefits that are related to cloud security automation. We've got cost reduction, compliance and governance concern, reputation management. I mean, this is a big deal for a lot of organizations because they have to, by law, comply with things like HIPAA or, GDPR if you're in the EU. And they just don't, again, have the resources to stay up with what those requirements are and to really properly implement them. And they try, and then they fail. And for some organizations, that can be very costly. Other things, so automation takes care of that. And, reputation management, brand reputation. Security incidents have, this sometimes underappreciated consequence, which is that even if you recover, even if your incident response plan worked perfectly, your DR plan worked, your backups weren't compromised, you had immutable backups, you had all these different things, and you got back up and running. If, it gets out that you were the victim of a cyber attack, customers may be like, whoa, is this who I want protecting my data or connecting into my systems? It can just be a real problem. So we want to prevent some of that. Let's talk about some of the key points. And as I go through here, I'm going to kind of highlight some things now, and we'll dive deeper into them in a little bit. So we need, from security automation, cloud security automation, we really need, I'll call them my top 3 things to be included. And one, that it's always active, always aware, always alert. So continuous monitoring and threat detection, okay? we need it to be super fast, which is the advantage of a computer system in the first place, right? Why did computers become so popular with finance back in the day and things like that? Because, nobody can do math as fast as a computer. Nobody can do these things. So by leveraging that, we get faster identification and resolution, therefore, of security incidents, particularly when we deploy AI. More on that later. And then, as I've been emphasizing, the resource optimization, so allowing us to deploy our resources into areas where we really need that human capital to focus. When we talk about cloud security automation, I kind of want to cover the areas, the scope of what we're really meaning when we do this. And it's pretty simple with the one-liner kind of elevator pitch, right? With the fact that we're putting security across all aspects of our cloud lifecycle. So not just infrastructure or platform or software, and during the stage of use, but during the earlier stages of the life cycle, from development all the way to the later stages like retirement. So it needs to be integrated into that entire life cycle. So what are some key components to these type of solutions? Well, infrastructure as code is one. CI/CD, SIEM, and I'm going to really focus on SIEM as we talk about AI in a bit. Couple more benefits. As I said, as I go through here, I'll kind of throw some things out and then get into more detail later, and keep mixing it up. So security policies, I am a huge fan of standardization. And I don't care if it's standardization of policy, of procedure, of equipment, of design. The more you standardize, the easier it is for you and your team to support, the easier it is for you to train. There's all these different benefits to standardization, but it's not as easy as it sounds. Automation does help us standardize, particularly the application of our security policies across our cloud environment. And, there's that manual errors topic again. I'm going to try and reinforce some of these key points. Even the best of us make typos occasionally. As I mentioned before, we can no longer check on things once a day, a few times a day, once in the morning, once at lunch, once in the evening. Yeah, that doesn't cut it when it comes to security, and all of us know that. Everyone on the webinar knows that. We need continuous threat detection intelligence. That's why we have IPS, IDS, all these different types of things. And we really need these to occur in the cloud environment also. And we need to be doing these things on cloud infrastructure, so if you're using things like Azure Firewall or that sort of thing, you need to be monitoring those for problems to operating system level, whether that be in an AVD or another type of instance, or, any of the other aspects where you go. And we mentioned governance, compliance earlier. I want to mention now that even private organizations often have some sort of regulatory obligations that they need to be aware of. And I go into a lot of organizations who are like, no, we're privately held. We're family owned. We don't have to worry about any of that. And I'm like, well, actually you do. And I show them the laws and that sort of thing. And they're like, oh, wow, we never knew that. We weren't told that, or that sort of thing. And I tell them that, the risk is low that somebody is going to audit you for these things, but most organizations want to do the right thing. And so once they become aware that, hey, I'm supposed to comply with something, they will try their best to make sure that they do comply. I do believe that organizations and the people in those organizations, by and large, have integrity and the desire to comply with what they're supposed to comply with when they know about it. How about we talk about our incident response? Okay. Incident response, everyone should have a formalized incident response plan. Okay. And typically this is part of what I call a good disaster recovery architecture. I get paid and go a lot to help organizations with their DR plan and making sure that it's robust and thorough and everything that they want and need it to be. And one of the first things that is a challenge for some of these folks is to realize that disaster recovery is not just backup restore. It's not just about data backups. In fact, that's only one piece. You also need business continuity plans, and you need incident response plans. And when we put all these three major concepts together, and there's smaller ones that I throw in there, then we've got a DR architecture as far as I'm concerned, because, what's going to happen is when an event occurs, you're going to go to your incident response plan, and it's going to tell you, hey, this is what I do, who I communicate with, what I shut down or turn on, or all those things, and how I do it, all that. And one of the things that's going to be in there is, kind of a decision tree that's going to point to whether business continuity is necessary or not. Are operations disrupted? If they are, do we have a business continuity plan which says, hey, this is how you can keep moving even though your computer systems aren't available? They're doing it today. The airlines immediately contacted the FAA about some of the ground stops with the outages to start helping them get around things without access to their own systems. Healthcare systems. I know of one major nationwide healthcare system that has sent out numerous text messages and such to its employees saying, hey, you still need to show up to work, right? You may not have your company email and that sort of thing, and you may have heard that records are unavailable, but we need to have you show up to work. And you might think that would be common sense, but it isn't. So that's obviously part of their incident response and business continuity plan. Business continuity plan is what the business does to try and keep operating while the IT systems are unavailable. Then finally, we have that DR plan, which is, what we do to recover the lost system. And I know I dove much deeper into that than this slide shows, but it adds context to this topic. First, as I said, incident response is the thing that comes immediately after the event. The first thing that happens when you're aware something's going on. Well, the longer it takes for you to become aware, the more damage is probably being done. And that damage could be to your IT systems, it could be to your customer service, it could be to any area, but the more damage is being done, the longer it goes undetected. So automation can help us speed that up. In fact, most automation, or many of the automated techniques that we deploy, some that were discussed in the previous session, will help us identify an incident in milliseconds or seconds, right? Even minutes is better than, just 5 years ago, where we typically wouldn't find out about things for hours, even days sometimes. By rapidly identifying the event and immediately kicking in the incident response plan and communication and that sort of thing, we are able to lower the temperature, lower the damage threshold much more effectively and much quicker. And even better than automated identification is automated remediation. So, hey, it automatically took care and isolated that computer that flagged an event or did this sort of thing. And many, particularly smaller organizations, have really well-founded concerns. And this whole patch debacle today with CrowdStrike, if it really is a patch debacle, is going to heighten those concerns. But the approach I like to take to remediation against the current threats that are out there in the world, cyber warfare, I mean, all that stuff, is I immediately isolate, then investigate, then remediate, okay? So if and I do in many cases, I should say, automate the isolation part. So the system automatically identified a threat and automatically isolated it. I now know it's locked off as fast as it can be. And then it begins collecting information for me and helping with my investigation, helping speed that up. And then, I can release it later. And I always get somebody that goes, yeah, what about a false positive? What if it, isolates and it really wasn't a problem? Or what if it isolates the CEO's computer or that sort of thing? Well, it needs to, because every hole in your security safety net is a massive increase in the risk that you're taking on. And, I hear it all the time where, our risk appetite's pretty high. Really, no big deal's going to happen. And then, unfortunately, in many of those organizations, I get a call later and said, hey, something happened, make it better. Well, I can't unring a bell, right? I can help recover, but I can't unring a bell. I can't get rid of the event. And so let me keep going here. Remember I mentioned infrastructure as code earlier? Well, let's talk about that for a couple seconds here. What do I mean by that? Well, essentially, I mean that I'm going to provision, so deploy, and then manage my cloud infrastructure, my computing infrastructure that's in the cloud, through computer understandable files, so machine readable files. And examples of this would include, Terraform or AWS CloudFormation. And really, this helps us automate a manual process that is very repetitive for some organizations. So infrastructure as code with automation can really, really help many of us in our day-to-day. Now, moving on to CI/CD and security, essentially, well, we need to automate some routines that we introduce into these pipelines. We got to be following and checking things and doing things because, as I mentioned earlier, we need that faster threat detection, that faster incident response. And, some examples of a couple tools are GitLab CI and Jenkins. Those are pretty straightforward. Take a peek here at SIEM, Security Information and Event Management. Really, it's just like it sounds like. It takes bunches and bunches of data coming from multiple sources and integrates them into hopefully a single pane of glass that then you can drill into and that sort of thing. I tell people it's like this. Back in the old days, we used to just go to the event viewer and we'd look in, maybe the application log, and then we'd see something and we go, oh, well, that looks like that might have triggered a system event. And then we're looking in the system log, and we're kind of bouncing around, collecting, correlating information. And a good SIEM system will do that for us. You have Sentinel, Splunk, QRadar. There's a lot of SIEM tools that are out there, particularly cloud-focused SIEM tools. I'm going to talk more about SIEM in a bit during the AI section. So, policy as code, right? Remember I talked about isolate, then investigate, then remediate? Well, that's a policy. Now, if I can take that and automate it and then embed that automation, I'm essentially automating the enforcement of my security policy, my IT security policy. It puts it in place. It makes it so that it's not adaptive. You know, one of the worst things that I see happen, and I've dealt with this far more than I want to admit, is IT folks, particularly young ones, new to the career, get a call or think they're getting a call from the CEO or the CFO or whatever, and says, hey, you know, you need to unisolate my computer. I got work to do, or I got to do this, or I got to do that, or whatever. And they release it, and this thing went from being contained on one device to running rampant across the network. Think about the recent attack where, you know, a good social engineering cyber attacker called the help desk and got them to, you know, essentially reset an executive's MFA, and then they were able to penetrate the system. When it's automated, it takes away that part. The CEO or the CFO or the CIO is still going to get aggravated, but it does provide you some insulation in doing the right thing by saying, well, we have that automated because the faster it reacts, the better it is. And now that it's reacted and identified something, you know, let us dive in and see what's going on and get you back as quickly as we can. But if you ask permission first, they will often say, nope, I got to get work done. I got to get this or whatever. So I call this the better to ask forgiveness than permission approach. I think we might have a question that came in. So Ravi asks a great question. What is a better solution? Having cloud-native solutions such as Security Hub and Sentinel, or third-party solutions like Splunk from a management, cost, productivity standpoint, especially for enterprises with multiple cloud deployments, right? So maybe you have you know, some Amazon Web Services, some Microsoft Azure, some Google Cloud, and, you know, that can make things more difficult. But that also provides a strong clue to my answer to this question, Ravi, and that is, it depends. And I know groans are going out everywhere because that's a cop-out answer, and everybody's like, yeah, that's a cop-out answer. But it really is true. There is no cookie-cutter form of what's best. And my recommendation is to think of it like you think of your cloud in the first place. Most likely, you didn't just say, oh, well, look, this is the cloud provider I'm supposed to use, and I'm going to put everything there, and we're all done. It's a lift and shift, so on and so be it. No, odds are at some point you decided, hey, this thing that we're doing in-house, we can put that in the cloud, save some money, do some better performance, whatever it might have been, and you move that. And then you had something else that you're like, wow, we could enhance our operations by doing this new thing. And instead of deploying that architecture in-house, let's put it up in the cloud. Cloud-native backup solutions are what I'm seeing and have been seeing a ton of activity around. So organizations that used to have very significant 6 or 7 figure investments in on-prem architecture, whether it have been, Dell EMC or whatnot, are moving to cloud-based solutions where they don't have to have all that equipment and the large-scale support contracts and that kind of thing. So you analyze it in the same way and make the decision based on what your specific needs are. And you do kind of have to ensure that you're bringing non-IT people into the conversation. So some of your business unit leaders and that sort of thing. So automated detection and response, of course, you've got AWS GuardDuty and Azure Security Center. Those are good ones. And, when we really talk about comprehensive solutions, again, this kind of goes to your point, Ravi, we want to integrate various automation tools. And I guess there's no harm in putting this little pro tip out there, and that's that I can't think off the top of my head of a single implementation that I've helped with or been part of that doesn't use a hybrid of cloud native and those third-party solutions you mentioned, and even some on-prem solutions that are connected to the cloud. I'm always tweaking and dialing it in and adjusting, re-architecting in some cases, that sort of thing. Obviously, you've got, Microsoft Security Center, Google Cloud, the Command Center, and then the AWS Security Hub. Those are some prime examples of these things. All right. Nitty gritty now. Now we're really going to kind of take some meaty chunks here. And one of them is to just start right out by saying, let's all have the same understanding of what I mean when I say cloud security automation. And, the first thing I have here is pretty straightforward, and many of you are probably like, wow, that's common sense. Using automated things to secure my cloud. Yep, that is. The second is I'm talking about integrating these automated tools and processes to drive security practices into your DevOps pipeline or your FinOps pipeline. Okay, we want to push into these things, get it in there. What are some of the core objectives of doing this? Right, we've talked about a lot of reasons for the need for cloud security automation and that kind of thing. But if I'm sitting down and I'm saying, okay, I need to accomplish 2 things, what are they? Well, first, I want that efficiency that I talked about, being able to free up my human capital resources to do other things. And along with that goes scale. I want them to be able to grow with my growing enterprise. And then my second point is that I absolutely want to cut down that time to detection, that time between when it happens and when my incident response kicks in. And that can also mean finding out before it happens, right? There may be indicators of potential compromise. We often talk about indicators of compromise or IOC, but I like that in that there's indicators of potential compromise, a compromise that may be coming or could happen. And automation is the most effective, best route I have found for finding those indicators of potential compromise and beating them back, eliminating them, closing those holes before they become loss of service type issues. some of the elements. I know in the previous session, there was quite a bit of talk about scripting and, PowerShell connections to like ChatGPT and that sort of thing. Well, you can use a lot of scripts. I love PowerShell myself, and you can upload those scripts and integrate them into your cloud environment, particularly if you use Microsoft Azure or Windows AVDs, that kind of thing. You can put loads of scripts that can help you with anything from, log aggregation from your VMs, kind of pushing them somewhere, to, generating yourself a health report. I have some PowerShell scripts that I love to use for that, they automatically email me and let me know how much of my cloud-based HCI infrastructure is doing every day, that sort of thing. Vulnerability scanning, patch management, all those things. And I talked about incident response. How about we automate a number of those points that we have to complete, those tasks of our incident response? So we create automatic response workflows where the system says, hey, here is my communications matrix. I'm going to send a text to each of these numbers, and this is going to be the body of the text. I'm going to include some details. I'm going to send emails to this. Maybe I'll use an automated dialer that dials a phone and plays a pre-recorded message. I've done a number of things here to automate more than just the isolation of an infected device or the shutdown of a potential breach point or that sort of thing. I've started to automate a lot of my incident response plan. So now we're going to kind of address the current elephant in the room. It's the elephant in the room about every IT subject there is, and that really kind of gets into artificial intelligence and machine learning, that sort of thing. And I've had the great opportunity to study and work with some of the real AI leaders and thought provokers, if you will, from MIT CSAIL, their computer science and artificial intelligence labs. And they've done some really great work and published a lot of great tips around AI and how it will help in the security end of it. And really, where I see it having immediate impact today is you're able to, put things in using AI, even large language models and different things like that help with that faster threat detection and incident response, and that predictive analysis of those indicators of potential compromise that I talked about. And of course, I'm going to put as an emerging trend also serverless security, because we have a lot of organizations, particularly large organizations. You're in the Fortune 500, you probably have a pretty good section of your architecture that is now serverless. Well, how do we secure that? How are you securing that? And how much of that security is manual, repetitious, waste of resources? And how can you automate it? And a lot of those organizations are really trying to answer that question right now. So as I've done before, I always kind of like to make sure that we're speaking the same language. We all have the same concept of what we're talking about here. And artificial intelligence and machine learning is really the use of computing power and I typed it in the formal way of algorithms, statistical models, whether they be large language models or whatever, to perform tasks without somebody sitting there and typing, saying what to do. So that's really all it is, right? Is let the computers use the power within them, leverage the things they're great at to analyze something and take an action or provide suggestions, that sort of thing. And, generative AI is huge when it comes to cloud security, big things. And I've already talked about how how computing is great at being super fast. But I should have extended that to say it's great at being super fast with huge amounts of data, like unbelievable amounts of data. And it's just getting better and better and better. We're currently in what is largely considered the fourth wave of artificial intelligence. So even though a lot of people, have just started talking about it in terms of putting it in their company or their organization, AI goes back into the 60s. I think even into the 50s a little bit if you consider some things. We just didn't have the computing power to drive it through where we needed it to be. We now do. We have the storage capacity, we have the computing power, and that's why AI is evolving during this fourth wave at unprecedented rates. So what is some of what AI adds strong advantages to when it comes to security and security automation in particular? Those indicators of potential compromise, identifying anomalies. Computers, because they operate very fast and they can analyze huge amounts of data, they can look at what has happened before over and over and over and over again and pick out the differences and the very nuanced differences and all those things. So it's great at flagging potential threats before they become actual incidents. One that I really like is the behavioral analysis. So this deals a lot with not just external threats, hackers, if you will, but also with insider threats. We can use AI and automation to keep an eye on, maybe an employee is using resources in a way that they shouldn't, or, is getting ready to do the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory Slugworth thing and, sell to the other candy company. Yeah, I know I'm dating myself, but I can't hide from it anymore. I'm getting more gray in my beard than I used to have, so might as well embrace the age. We have risk scoring. This is a great tool. If you're not using risk scoring right now in your organization, here's another takeaway for you. I want you to focus on that in the coming weeks and months, because if you can create a scoring matrix for you and your organization, your team, your organization as a whole, you can say, hey, this is our risk appetite. These are the types of things that are more risky for us. These things are less risky for us. And then you identify potential events that would fall into each of those categories, and you score them. You develop a matrix. And then you can automate that, and now you can get reports, if you will, that tell you, hey, you're in a heightened state of risk right now versus where you were yesterday, or, things have calmed down a little bit and risk is lower. But I am a huge fan of using a risk scoring matrix to prioritize your resource assignment, if you will. So what are really the three techniques that artificial intelligence engines use for helping us with security. We have supervised learning, which is where the system is training on data that a human has already kind of labeled and said, this is what this means, this is what this is, that sort of thing. And it's using that then to compare to activity it sees and predict possible threats. Unsupervised, this is where I really, really like IT and the security environment. And it's where it takes these huge amounts of data that are mind-numbing, and it finds these patterns and anomalies inside those data sets that we would probably miss even if we did find them. Now, I remember an IT pro and speaker, one of the best with packet captures, Rhonda Layfield, and she would talk about how she would print out these huge network packet captures and then sit next to the pool and go through them across the weekend or whatever to go back. And I always thought that was crazy because I'd have fallen asleep about 14 seconds in, but it just wouldn't be effective nowadays. You would find it after the damage has been too severe or too impactful. It needs to happen automated and faster, and unsupervised learning within AI is really the mode to succeed at this. And then you have the way that humans learn typically, which is trial and error. Oh, I did this. This is what resulted. Don't like that result. Let's try something different. This is what resulted. Don't like that result either. So on and so forth. You get it. So that's reinforcement learning. And these are the three key techniques when it comes to AI and ML. Some of the challenges that we face, it's pretty complex to set up security automation for many things. I mean, there's some simple stuff, some low-hanging fruit, but much of it takes a considerable amount of time, and your organization has to buy into committing those resources. Hopefully you have a director, CIO, C-suite in general that supports investment in security and proper security and those kind of things, and will make that resource allocation easier, but that's a big one. And then, we don't live in a vacuum. Things are constantly changing. I can't tell you how many times I have, spent a week developing a massive PowerShell script to do something, and during that week, something changed in either how the cloud works or the threat I'm typically looking for, whatever, and I got to go back in and change the code a little bit, And that's a real problem because now somebody has to maintain it. It's just like robots out in a manufacturing floor. For years, everybody's like, oh, these are taking away jobs from people. Well, they're still jobs. Somebody has to know how to configure the thing. Somebody has to know how to repair the thing. Somebody has to know how to update software in the thing. They're still jobs. They're just different jobs. The algorithm bias, that's a tough one, because if you end up with a model that your AI engine is using, which has a bias towards a certain security product or vendor or any other bias is present, it can not only make it unfair, but it can make it miss things or inappropriately report things, and that can be a problem, obviously. So what are a few examples? Financial services, banking industry, right? Regulatory is huge there, so let's automate some of that. fraud detection and prevention, identity theft, right? That's been rampant forever. Let's use some automation to help with that process and preventing it. Healthcare. This is a big one because we've seen lots of patient care data breaches and that sort of thing. And we really need to get better at securing that data and using AI to continually evolve that security so it's never trying to just sit in a vacuum. Some future trends that I think you're going to see soon is, we're going to have artificial intelligence that's going to be part and parcel of those automated.
Are you there, John? Sorry about that, folks. Hold on while we check into the problem. John lost his connection and will be dialing back in promptly, so please hold on. Thanks for your patience, folks. It should just be a couple more minutes and John will be back online.
I'm back. Hello. Yeah, it's
good to be back. Thank you.
Thanks, dude. It's always humbling to have a tech problem when you're doing a tech conference, but hey, it just keeps it real. Keeping it real. So, we'll kind of blast through this because everybody probably spent my little drop off there reading, and we'll talk about some of the common tools and platforms that are out there right now that have an artificial intelligence component. And you have Splunk, you have QRadar. I don't know. Right underneath there, we have some cloud native tools in there, Azure Sentinel, Google Cloud AI, Copilot for security, of course, is AI. But, we've got a lot of good tools and platforms that are out there available to us. So how do I properly choose those? Well, I need to make sure that they're compatible with what I've got going on right now. I can't just rip everything apart to make a tool work. No, it's got to be compatible. I got to be able to integrate it, hopefully integrate it easily and cheaply. And I need the flexibility to be able to move between partners when and where I want to. Sometimes that can be hard after you've integrated, so you want to make sure that that's not the case for you. Make sure that it can scale. Of course, flexible for those multi-cloud environments like Robbie mentioned earlier. And there's always the cost and resource question that is brought up in every discussion, right? Even if your IT team doesn't bring it up, odds are your CIO will, or your CEO or COO or CFO certainly. And you need to look at it from a total cost of ownership perspective, not just hard costs. You need to include the soft costs because they will often exceed the hard costs. What do I mean by that? Hard costs are, what you pay for licensing, what you pay for compute, all that stuff. The soft costs are things like, hey, I've got 3 employees that are dedicated to configuring this for the next 6 months. Well, that's a considerable investment, not only in what you're paying them, but what other projects aren't getting done because they're focused on this. And then any potential hidden costs. And because they're hidden, I can't tell you what they might be, but you're always trying to ferret them out and find out, okay, if I use this tool, are you then going to come back to me and say, oh, well, you owe me more money because you have to buy our appliance. It can't run on the hardware you have, or something along those lines. And then, make sure that you're investing in operationalizing things, that you are getting your staff trained and ready to go. And that's about all the time we have today. So I want to thank everyone, and I'm going to turn it back over to David.
Okay, great job, John. Thanks for that excellent presentation and answering all those questions.